Hey, Carly.
Hi, how are you?
Just going to adjust my screen a little bit here. I think this is going to be all right.
Great.
Hey, I looked at the Google site and it's just awesome. You've done such a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. Those videos are great.
You think they're
Yeah.
just nice to have little 5-minute resources. And I checked with Karen, obviously, to get the go ahead from her. She was delighted that they would be useful. I thought, great work.
Awesome.
Yeah. How did you get the slide deck to kind of carousel from slide to slide?
So at the bottom of the screen, when you embed it, there's a little gear. And if you click on that little gear, it gives you the option to loop it. And you can also like remove speaker notes and all of those things so that people, when they log in, don't see all your notes and everything. So
Got it.
Yeah, I love it. I love Google Sites.
Now, that's one of the things that, I would say in the last 3 months, I've begun to appreciate. Oh my goodness, this is really the way. If I were in a classroom and I were instructing, for every single unit, I would want a Google site.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd put everything up there and I would link it to Google Classroom, and Google Classroom would really just be a launch pad for kids to go and click to where they need to go.
Yeah, yep. We used it a lot for digital portfolios too, at the secondary level, which was handy so that the kids could actually showcase their best work in that format. So
now, Carly, what is your background?
So my background is I started as a business teacher and I did that for many years. And then I explored educational technology and I actually got a position doing that, training teachers and doing professional development. And during that time, I also got my administrative degree at St. Rose. So then I became the director of instructional technology at the school where I was a business teacher. I ended up going back there at Wyndham. In the Catskills, which is a lovely school, and so that's kind of how I got into it all.
Awesome. So when did you get your advanced certification for school leadership at St. Rose?
So I actually have my SBL. I don't have my SDL. That's still on my to-do list, but I did that in 2015.
Okay. I was back in 06, 07.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, really loved that program.
Oh, I loved it. It was awesome. I made some great friends and I learned so much and it was just wonderful. The professors were excellent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found, just talking with a lot of folks, meeting with different people and different leadership programs, that St. Rose at that time, and unfortunately, I think it's gone through.
All right, everybody, it's 4 o'clock, so we are going to get started. My name is Jerome Steele with CASDA. Very happy that you all joined us today. We're about to get started with instructional design principles for remote learning. Everyone's microphone is muted. I would ask that you direct your questions either to the Q&A section or to the chat box. Yeah, Mary, don't worry if your dog is barking. It's not disrupting us. The microphone is in fact muted. Dogs and children will not be a disruption, so they're welcome to kind of tune in alongside you if that's what you would prefer. So chat for questions, and everyone is muted. The recording will be sent out to your email directly tomorrow, but it will be shared via the Google site like Carly and Mike were just saying. And so now I'm going to turn you over to CASDA faculty members Carly Mead and Mike Pipa. Thanks again for joining us.
Hey,
Thank you.
welcome everybody. Excited to have everyone joining us. I see Sophie and Amanda, who are two outstanding colleagues, have joined us. And just want to say welcome and what a delight it is to have been working with Carly Mead, who is a superb and wonderful educator. We're hopeful today that much of the ideas that we share are not new, but that we can generate some thinking and some chat conversation around their application to remote learning. And, you know, this amazing shift educators all over the country, especially in New York State, are performing. And these are key ideas to keep in mind, because business as usual is simply not going to work anymore. So it's often said that opportunity comes brilliantly disguised as catastrophe, but there is a lot of opportunity here. And Carly, I didn't know if you wanted to also make some remarks at the outset.
Yes, thank you so much, Mike. My name is Carly Mead, and I am an instructional technology faculty member with CASDA, and I'm so excited to be here with you today also to kind of share some best practices for how you can manage the educational technology that you're going to be using during this time of remote instruction. So the discussion that I'm going to be adding to the conversation is really going to be more general in terms of we're all using very different tools right now, but there are best practices that we could all be applying regardless of the tools that we are using. So I'm looking forward to sharing that discussion with you in a few moments. I also just want to take a moment to highlight, we have mentioned that there is a Google site that we have created for you to access after our session here today. The Google site is filled with a variety of resources that we hope you will find helpful during this time. It also includes our contact information. So if you feel like you would like to reach out to us after this session for advice or seeking additional ideas, please feel free to do that. To do that, because we really do want to serve as a resource for you during this time.
Awesome. I'm just going to, before I advance the slide, put this little notion out there for everybody. Many of us are having to experience pretty high degrees of discomfort as we work with instructional technologies that have been unfamiliar until now. And our learning, in many cases, will be mistakes driven. And that's particularly disconcerting, I think, for teachers, because we like to appear always with a certain level of competence. It instills trust in our kids. And when we can't do that, it doesn't feel so great. But the opportunity there to me is that we can model for our kids how we handle mistakes. And we can, you know, exhibit that grace that we want to extend towards our students, towards ourselves. And it is okay. In fact, those mistakes are really the seeds of new learning, new wisdom. And that's really what we want our kids to be fearless about. So that's the opportunity I see as we go forward. A lot of the resources we're going to share, I know many of you know very, very well. So please don't be bashful on that chat to throw additional pieces of information that you feel are pertinent and resources. That will be to the benefit of everybody.
Daniel, we will be emailing you with the link to the site. So thank you for asking that question.
Just want to go over our objectives quick. You know, we want to assess the current needs, share current instruction platforms and tools and principles of engaging lesson design. We're also going to make some reference to universal design for learning, because that becomes more important now than ever for our students who are most vulnerable, our ELs, our students with IEPs and 504s. We want to share tips for digital and remote support and instructional design. If you are making asynchronous resources, like your own instructional videos, Edutopia's 5-step guide is pretty awesome. They have a slide development template for online instruction that I thought was really useful, just as a simple structure for presenting new material. And then we want to end our session by talking about next steps and possible methods of all of us sort of having an expanded professional network as we go forward over the next several weeks. You know, let's use our chat format just for some quick brainstorming on what you see as your current challenges. Feel free to just start to throw up some of the observations that you've been having.
So some of the observations that are coming through are not all of the students have internet access, which obviously presents an equity issue when it comes to remote learning. So how do people navigate that is the question. Another question is, how do you get students to do the work remotely?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been noticing, and I'm seeing this, engaging all students, connecting with students. Many districts have made it clear to their staff that, you know, we want you to be keeping tabs of the number of students and which students are responding to your online entreaties. And there are a variety of ways where people have decided to do that. Once you've got the names of students who are not connecting with you, that's really important information to share with your administrators. If they haven't already let you know what their plan is, then it's time to make that plan. But I think in most cases, districts realize that one of the tasks administrators are taking on is to make those connections to see what the impediments are for families and for students. I also know that at least 20 different districts in our capital region have been collaborating over the last week on a document for the next 2 weeks or more of what instruction is going to look like. And the details are pretty consistent because these districts are working together. And they're very exhaustive in the guidance that they're providing in terms of how new instruction is going to happen, what grading is going to look like. So, you know, we're early days in all of this, but I'm seeing evidence of some really important work happening from administrative colleagues across the districts.
Definitely. A lot of questions coming through have to do with supporting students, encouraging their participation. How are people getting students to participate in the content? One question related to educational technology is, can you choose which students to mic and unmic when video conferencing? And the answer to that is yes. You can, and Google Meet, if that's the platform that you're using. Well, it depends on the platform you're using, but there is a way in which you can mute and unmute the students. So I definitely will be sending out some information on how to do that after the session today.
And thank you for that, Cap Region BOCES link for Essential Ed. To Sharon, you know, that's something that, you know, I would say Jerome can definitely confirm with certainty, but I don't see why not. Ellen, that's a great sign that your IEP students are letting you know they have no questions. However, their response to work and the work that they're showing you will indicate whether or not they're being truthful.
Supporting parents is a huge one. Emily, thank you for that that question, supporting parents and helping them to make this as stress-free of a situation as possible for them, because most parents are trying to work from home while managing their child's education in the home. So I think that being able to support them is definitely very important. And I think that one of the best ways that we as educators can support the parents is have very clear and consistent communication with them and be very specific in terms of the expectations that we have for the students, and also make sure that we simplify things, which I'll be talking about in a few moments.
Caroline's question, Carly, and correct me if I'm wrong, is about Google Meet. And if you're the person who's establishing that Google Meet session, is there a way to conclude that meeting so that students don't remain in that Google meeting after you intended it to end? And I believe if you're the person organizing that session, there is, a button that says end session that you click, and that should end it for everybody.
It should. I have read recently that some students are able to get back into the Google Meet after it's concluded with the code. I know that there have been some posts on Twitter recently about that being an issue at some districts.
Got it.
So that's definitely something to consider and to look into when using that tool.
The question about working with
Oh,
students.
if you give it a nickname, yes. Sorry.
Oh, got it.
I just if you give the meeting a nickname, that should prevent them from being able to go back into it.
That's awesome.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome. There was a great question about if you're a special ed teacher or general ed teacher working with students with severe autism, and how to engage them in this new remote learning setting where they're looking at a computer screen. What a enormously challenging environment that is to maintain interest for students with severe autism. And that's something that I think we're going to need to work hard on in a future webinar with our special ed colleagues, to be generating new ways of engagement and how do we overcome those barriers. There are certain things that are going to require new ingenuity, that's for sure.
Definitely.
So there's a second question here, and I think people have kind of started to move in that direction. If you had a wish for what your online instruction would look like and could do, what are some of those wishes? And I think we're starting to see that.
Someone also asked about managing email, which I have to agree that is going to present itself as a huge challenge during this time. There are going to be endless emails. One idea I had is if you're looking for information from parents or feedback from parents, and you have a lot of parents that are associated with you if you teach many different sections of a class, rather than having each of the parents respond to an email, perhaps you could send out a simple Google form or a survey to get the information that you need from them or students. And then it all houses itself in a lovely spreadsheet. So instead of digging through hundreds of emails, all of the information that you're looking for from the students or parents would go into that type of format so that it's not all going into an email. But of course, that depends on what it is that you're trying to get from your parents and students in terms of information. Sometimes you'll have to email, but there will be other times when you could do something like a Google form.
And I see Lynn's wish, and that is, for her coaches to be able to help her set up her first day of online teaching. And I want that wish to come true for you. There might be some possibility for connection with some of our participants today, so that not only do you have those coaches with whom you work in your district, but you may have some virtual coaches with whom you can stay connected with after today's session. For the sake of time, I'm going to begin to move us through our presentation. And we're just going to look for some of the platforms folks are using right now. Are you sharing tasks with students? If so, how are you sharing those tasks? Are you expected to instruct new material? Are you expected to grade students? This has varied from district to district, and we're seeing some different approaches among districts. So I think it's good to know a little bit about what people are having to do. Class Dojo, Google Chat, Google Classroom as sort of that hub from which everything emanates. Yep, complete, incomplete. Yep. So Monday seems to be a big day. Seesaw, yes. Screencastify, yes.
Mhm. We just received a message too asking about the chat and how there's valuable information that's happening in this chat right now. So after our webinar today, we'll be curating all of the information and sending it out with our Google site so that everybody can access all of the wonderful resources that are being shared right in the chat too. So you don't have to worry about taking notes during the session because we will get that information to you.
Awesome. I see a tremendous diversity of tools and resources here. For the sake of time, we have some videos that I think are very helpful, but I want us to be able to get through as much information as possible. This one by Simon Sinek is an old and a good one. Essentially, he asks us to start with the why whenever we are designing anything. And this becomes especially true with instruction. He uses classic examples of organizations and individuals who started with the why rather than the what. And he challenges organizations in that we usually know what we do, we know how we do it, but too few people have a deep understanding of why. And when we talk about engagement, we absolutely have to start with why. Why is this material, why is this work, this task, something to which you as a student should devote your time? Instructional design that starts with the why has a learning target or purpose that is clear and relevant to students. Clear and relevant. Relevance is really something that teachers have to be masters at, and so many teachers are. Instructional design that starts with the why has clear success criteria, so students know when they've gotten it. And it has a hook that invites engagement. This text, Engagement by Design, is a wonderful resource. It came out in 2018. Nancy Fry, Doug Fisher, and Russ Quaglia. Nancy and Doug come out of San Diego State University. What's wonderful about their work is not only are they post-secondary professors who work at the university, but they're also secondary high school teachers who are immersed in the practice and in the classroom. Russ Quaglia has the Student Voice Institute, and he is an outspoken advocate for how we incorporate student voice at the center of all learning. That link towards the bottom is to the Corwin resource page for this text. And on that site, there is a ton of information that they make available to us free of charge. It includes videos that illustrate their concepts, as well as materials that you can print. The one thing I would say about engagement by design is that all of us who work so hard and are so passionate about the art of teaching know there's nothing new under the sun about what constitutes effective instruction and what makes wonderful teaching. This book isn't trying to chart new territory. It's trying to distill it and put it all in a manageable place, one-stop shopping, and I find a really useful text. Student learning is affected by teacher clarity, and if you are familiar at all with John Hattie's research out of Australia, I think it's the University of Queensland, he's compiled a meta-analysis that he put out in 2009, very famous collection of about 3 decades worth of educational initiatives and their impact on student learning. He identifies 1 year of student learning as 0.44 correlation between teacher instruction and student learning. And anything above 0.44 means you are providing more than 10 months worth of learning for that child. That child is taking away more than 10 months by that particular strategy or innovation that you're using. And teacher clarity doesn't have a 0.44 efficacy, it has a 0.75. It's almost worth 2 full years of learning for kids when teacher clarity is powerful and evident in each of the tasks you engage in with kids. They just kind of break it down, what they mean in this text, and then what they mean in terms of teacher and teacher clarity. The teacher knows what students are supposed to be learning, knows how students learn. The students know what they're supposed to be learning. And the test of that is if anybody, not the teacher, but if anybody were to ask them what it is they're learning and why. The teacher and students know what success looks like. I'm not going to click on this video as I explained earlier, but it does provide several classrooms in about a 3.5-minute video where success criteria are interwoven throughout the lesson, not just something that's mentioned at the outset and forgotten about for the rest of the lesson, but teacher and students refer back to it. It's incorporated throughout the lesson. We've begun to hit upon this a little bit, but I want you to reflect just some right now on what you see some of the challenges are that students face in this remote learning context. How have your expectations differed when instructing remotely? What are you learning about adjustments you might need to make to the amount of work that you expect? About the ways in which you expect students to respond? And when we think about teacher clarity, how might this begin to apply as we start to design instruction that we're delivering remotely? I see Anna's, yeah. That idea that we're not in school, so it must be vacation. Why should we? That why is going to be super important. And how do we make this appeal clear to kids?
Students have many siblings with only one device too, is a good point.
There are some resources that we're going to share at the end, but one of the resources is from Larry Ferlazzo, who has a short video. And we talk about social emotional learning and its import, especially now when kids are feeling disconnected, when what they need is reassurance from the adults who are familiar players in their lives and in their world. And starting before we try to deal with content with Maslow's needs and putting Maslow's needs in front of Bloom's taxonomy for just a bit, so that instruction simply begins with us checking in and asking our students how they are and listening carefully and what do they need. And the answers may take us quickly and swiftly away from content. I think that is absolutely okay. But once they know that we're here, that we care about them, they're going to remember how much they trust our voices at this stage. They've been with us for a good portion of the year. And that's when we can begin to lay the groundwork for the why. Why we do need to still give some time in our lives for learning and for feeding our minds. And this is not maybe the chosen context and venue and format for that learning, but it's the one we have. And we do need each other. And staying connected is key. Office hours are essential. And I think districts are coming through and giving some guidelines about when they want teachers to be available and how to communicate that to students.
I think that the idea of encouraging students to have a digital calendar too, I see that popping up in this discussion is very relevant. I think that's a great skill for the students to learn, and I think this presents itself as a huge opportunity to teach students those critical organization skills that maybe sometimes in a traditional setting we might not have time to cover those types of topics. So I think that that's a great point.
Tanya's got a couple of good observations. First, providing illustrations while you're working with students. That is so much of the essence of what we do in the traditional classroom setting. How do we do that in the remote setting? Screencastify is a wonderful tool to provide instruction, record it, and mark it up as you are providing materials. That's a wonderful tool. And Tanya, I'm glad and grateful for the honesty about this is so difficult for teachers under any circumstance to shift from classroom to online instruction. It's not possible to be great right off the bat or to be doing work that we feel is even good enough. And this is deeply frustrating to so many of us. And then there are those of us who are parents. And at the same time, we're trying to provide instruction. We're also having to run school in our homes and tend to the needs of our children, our partners, and feeling like we can't do any of it well. And this is part of the natural frustration. Anytime we have to undergo unexpected, unwanted, unsought for change. And I think this is why we talk so much about grace under these circumstances, not only to extend it to others, but especially to ourselves. This will last longer than we want it to, but there's going to become a point where we feel a level of competency that helps us catch our breath. And that's what we're swimming towards. And that's why we need to stay connected and stay with each other. Jill, you're absolutely right. Kids are always out in front of us with technology, sometimes a little too far out in front, but they can be huge and wonderful resources.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to move forward. Universal design for learning. Basically anything that has as its design component at its base, universal design, is taking into account every kind of possible and potential user of that device or that information. So we want to design instruction universally so that whoever is on our class roster, whoever is in our classroom community, those individuals have points of entry and exit from the learning instruction, from the learning design. And there are three basic principles: representation, action and expression, and engagement. And they're defined clearly here about how we represent work, about how we ask kids to interact with material and show what they've learned, and finding multiple ways to connect with our kids to motivate them. Providing choices and ways to demonstrate learning are especially important in that engagement component. But everything we've learned about our kids, everything we continue to learn and understand about them, helps us find the hooks that engage them. And there are always going to be those stubborn cases who remain just out of our reach, keep us up at night. That is to be expected. The benefits here of UDL are many. I think one of the important concepts at the heart of UDL and its practical application to classroom instruction and to remote instruction in particular, when we think about our roster of any of the classes that we're teaching, it's important that we think about our kids who are most ready for challenge, who love it, who are hungry for it, and demonstrate the rapidity with which they can assimilate new information and skills, and our kids who struggle the most. And those are sort of the edges of our class roster. When we're designing instruction, we want to make sure that we've designed instruction that invites at both ends of that continuum. Everybody in between will be captured. The link at the bottom of this screen will take you to a wonderful UDL site with more resources. And I'm just going to ask you to think a little bit. You don't have to really include this information on the chat, but that bold-faced text, who are your most challenged students? Who are your students most ready for challenge? Begin to think a little bit about how you design and implement remote instruction that might address these edges.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Okay. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of our discussion here today, really everyone is using a variety of educational technology. So what one person is using in 4th grade at one district, the 4th grade teacher at a neighboring district may be using a completely different platform. So I think it's important to talk with a group of this size, just in general terms, about best practices regardless of the app or platform that you are using. So we know that some districts are Microsoft-based and some districts are Google-based, and some teachers may be rocking video conferences using Zoom, and others may be using Google Meet. Some teachers might even be producing pre-recorded videos that they're sharing with their students so that they can watch the lesson and then follow up with the assignment. So whatever platform, app, or tech solution that you find yourself leveraging during this time, there are really some best practices that we have thought of for you to consider. Okay, so as Marie Kondo would say, the best way to find out what we really need is to get rid of that which we don't need. And in my experience, the same holds true for educational technology as well. There are endless options for communicating with students and fostering digital collaboration, conducting formative assessments, surveying, video production. The list can go on, and it can become incredibly overwhelming, excuse me, especially in a situation like this, where we are in uncharted territories and we are being propelled into a situation where we're now teaching remotely. So my advice to everyone is to simplify. Just like Marie Kondo would say, hold on to those things that bring you joy. I'm going to ask you and encourage you to only hold on to the ed tech tools that serve you right now and serve you in providing remote instruction right now. And ask yourself, what do I need from my educational technology? What do I need right now? How can I connect my classroom to someone's living room using educational technology? And then think about the different platforms that may be able to serve that purpose. Any app or platform that does not currently complement this mission, you should just set it to the side for now. Because in all honesty too, overwhelming students with tons of different applications and websites right now, it's probably not the right time. And those students will also need a ton of support at home from their family and using a lot of the tools that we're asking them to use. So the key is to really simplify during this time. Less is more in this situation. Identify what your priorities are in your curriculum, identify the critical lessons and assessments that you want to share with your students, and then choose the technology that's going to complement that game plan. Okay, so my next best practice recommendation for you is to establish guidelines and expectations for students. So whichever platform or app you have selected to use to connect with your students, it's really critical to have clearly defined expectations for student participation. So since remote instruction really does interfere with that face-to-face, in-person interaction between teachers and students, it's very critical that your expectations be clearly communicated so that the roles and responsibilities of both the student and the teacher are clearly defined. So when we're working remotely, regardless of the technology that we're using, patterns and routines are crucial. So if you're using videos, if you're emailing, if you're posting to a place like Google Classroom, try to do those things at the same time every day, so that when your students log in, they know what to expect and they know what's expected of them. As we've mentioned earlier, now is the perfect time to encourage your students to try to start building some of those organizational skills that in other situations we may not have the time to visit with them. So start talking about things like using a digital in their day and track their own progress. And this is an organizational skill that will serve them well beyond remote learning. Also encouraging students to do things like make to-do lists every day and listing out all of the things that they need to accomplish within the day kind of gets them into a routine that will help them and will make them feel comfortable and confident. And it will also be something that's familiar to them because they're familiar with a routine. And I think that's really, really critical right now. I also wanted to touch base and discuss video conferencing, because obviously a lot of us are using those tools to connect with our students. So there are some basic guidelines and some etiquette tips that I think are really important to share with your students and their families prior to going live with them, because they may have never experienced a video conference or participated in one. And I think it's important that before you connect that first time, that you kind of establish some guidelines and discuss with them some basic video conferencing etiquette, like muting the microphone when not speaking so that there's not a lot of background noise, and only unmuting when you have something to share or when the teacher asks you to unmute. Teachable moments like talking about connecting on time and being on time for things. So when we are not in isolation, we have to be on time for meetings and things of that nature. Now it's important that we're on time for things like video conferences. Talking to parents and families about ensuring that students can connect in a quiet space that's free of distractions is also really important. If there's a lot of busy activity happening when the student is trying to connect with their class on a video conference, that can make it really challenging for them to participate and get out of the video conference what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Also, I think it's important to encourage students to get dressed for their video conference just as if they were going to school, and that again will kind of embed itself and become part of their daily routine while they're home, which is very important. And also very critical, and I'll get to a discussion in a few moments about privacy and how important that is right now. I think it's very important to remind parents and families that it's not okay to take pictures of video conferences on the screen when they're happening and then posting them to social media, because that violates privacy laws and violates the students' privacy as well. A lot of these sessions include students' first names and last names. So I think just sending out an email or including a notice on your Google Classroom or your web page about how important it is that we protect student privacy during this time is a really important best practice.
There are so many great resources that are flying along in the chat. You know, the question about equity and is it equitable to expect students to be on time when not everybody might have access to the device at certain
Yes.
times? That's a great question.
That is an excellent question. In that case, what I know a variety of teachers are doing right now is they're actually surveying families to try to narrow it down to when the best time would be. But even in that case, it may not work for all of your students. So in the case that a student can't participate because they're unable to connect at that time, or perhaps they don't have a device, it's always a good idea to record your video conferences, especially when you have the opportunity to share those videos out with these families. So I think that recording the video conference is probably a good solution for that, so that the student can watch it during a time when they are available. But in the case where the student doesn't have a device, then they absolutely will not be able to access it, and it is inequitable.
I just want to talk quickly about the confidentiality issue that Danielle referred to. You know, what if you witness something, see something as a mandated reporter that causes you to be concerned about one of your students' safety? I would absolutely recommend in that moment that you contact an administrator to have a confidential conversation with that individual about what it is you observed and next steps you feel compelled to take.
Absolutely. And also another solution to the video conferencing method is to pre-record lessons. You don't have to video conference with the students for them to learn. I think it's a great tool to connect with the students. I think that they enjoy seeing their teacher live, but there's always the other option of pre-recording lessons using things like Screencastify or EduCreations. There's a variety of applications that you can use to pre-record lessons, and then you can simply send that out to students as well. So there are so many options, and it's really about what you're comfortable and confident with, and also what's going to work best for the students. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about streamlining communication and consistency. So one of the most important functions of educational technology is communication. And communication has never been more important than it is right now. It allows us to easily reach out to one or many with a few clicks of the keyboard and a press of a send button. And in our modern day educational landscape, we have many modalities of communicating with students and families. We have email, we have learning management systems, social media, apps like Remind or Class Dojo. Those are just a few examples. And all of those tools help us and are very effective in helping us capturing the attention of our target audience, which is our students and their families. And with all of those various options of communicating, it can sometimes start to feel like a juggling act. Like, where am I communicating with students? Which website am I logging into now? I posted it here, now I need to go over here and post it there. I think that during this unprecedented time of remote instruction, we really need to figure out what tool is going to be the primary one that we're going to be using to communicate with families. So if it's going to be email, then be consistent with that and communicate that with the students and their families, that they can always count on getting feedback, assignments, information about what's going on in their email. If it's going to be something like Google Classroom, communicate that with your students and their families. Let them know that that's where they're going to be able to find important information, because it can become a juggling act for us, because we're posting in all these different places, but then it can become challenging for students and their families who find that they're trying to piecemeal different bits of information together, and they know that sometimes they see information in one place and then other times they find it in their email. Sometimes they might see information on Twitter, and then other times it's on Google Classroom. So I think that because the risk of miscommunication is so significant in this situation, I think streamlining that communication and being very consistent with the way that you're communicating with students and their families is going to be essential. So I did want to also mention that one thing that I've noticed and people have mentioned to me is that there are so many emails or messages coming through to people on a daily basis that it can become very overwhelming, and people are missing important messages because things are filling up so quickly. So if you have the opportunity to work with colleagues and perhaps send out one email a day with all of the information that students and families need to know, or one post a day with all of those important messages and information, maybe that's something worth considering, because I think sometimes it can become a little bit cumbersome when students are receiving emails from every single teacher multiple times a day, and those messages are also going to parents. So if there is a way to somehow streamline that communication and have it come from one person in one message, that might be something worth looking at. I don't know if that's possible. It might not be possible in all situations, but any way that we can cut down on the number of pieces of communication that are going out on a daily basis, I think that's definitely worth investing some time in. I also think it's really important that we provide students with feedback and respond to them in as timely of a fashion as possible. So some students may not be able to move on to the next assignment until they get feedback on the first assignment. So I think that if we can reach out to students and provide them with that feedback that they need with respect to their work on a regular basis, that would be definitely a best practice that I would recommend, because without that feedback, it may be very challenging for some of the students to move on to Tuesday's assignment when they still are waiting for feedback on Monday's assignment. So trying to get into some sort of routine with providing students with the feedback that they need, I think will be very helpful as well. All right, so next is know your audience. So just really quickly, I think that it's really important that we understand the devices that our students are accessing at home to interact with us. So some students may be using Chromebooks, others may be using iPads or laptops. I think that it's important for you to know, do your students have a device? And if they do, what device are they using? Because that will dictate which application or platform you can use as well. Someone had asked earlier if EduCreations is only a tool that can be used from the App Store, and the answer to that is yes. So if your students are not, do not all have access to iPads, then that's probably not the best tool for you to use with them. So you're gonna need to know what devices are students using, and then planning from there forward. Also, knowing the comfort level of your students is really important. I think that most students are very comfortable when it comes to using educational technology, and especially if it's something that you've been using in the classroom with them already, they'll be very comfortable with it. But there may be students who are not familiar with the technology that they're being asked to use, and I think it's important that we support those students and provide them with the resources that they need to successfully and confidently utilize that technology. And I think one way that you can also do that is by empowering your students and encouraging them to support one another. Somebody had mentioned earlier in the chat how students can be great teachers when it comes to using technology, and that could not be truer. It's amazing. They are the best teachers, and I think that they would feel very empowered if they knew that they were going to be supporting some of their peers who are maybe struggling with using some of the tools. And the most important message, I think, on this slide is building your classroom community online. Right now, students are craving human interaction and familiar faces. And I think that we have such a tremendous opportunity to build a positive online culture that will feel very familiar to them. It will start to feel like their classroom used to feel to them. So I think that if there are ways that in which you can really build your classroom community by sharing stories, asking students what they've been doing at home, they can share with one another. I think that that will really build a positive environment that will last a long time. So I think that that is one of the most important messages here today. So student data privacy and security still matters. There have been many articles that I've been reading recently, and there have been many news reports on different applications and how they may not meet the educational privacy standards. So my message today is that student data privacy and security still matters. It's still very important. So most of us are very familiar that in New York State, we have EdLaw 2D, and at the federal level, we have FERPA and COPA. And to remain in compliance with all of these laws and to protect the students, there are definitely some considerations that we need to make when facilitating learning remotely. Most schools have privacy councils or technology committees in which the applications that we use are vetted and they're determined what to be either appropriate for students to use or inappropriate. So I would definitely refer to the whatever your district has put out there in terms of applications and platforms that have met that privacy criteria. But with remote instruction and all of this video conferencing, there is a huge potential to violate student privacy. And I think that just in general, some recommendations I have are, I would advise people not to take screenshots of virtual sessions with students. And I would, again, I mentioned this earlier, remind families that they should not be taking pictures of the video conferencing that takes place because that is a violation of student privacy. If you're recording your video conferences and you have the ability to not include the student faces in those recordings, I would recommend that you do that. And also, never encourage students to create accounts for different applications on their own. Students should only be using the educational accounts through your district. So never ask a student to go on a website and create an account for an app or a website or a platform that you might want to use with them, because that is also in violation of Educational Law 2D. But definitely these are things worth considering right now. And lastly, on Twitter, which is my favorite thing in the whole world, I go on there to learn new things every day, and every day I feel like I gain new resources or I interact with somebody who has great ideas. If you're not on Twitter yet, I would definitely recommend that you take the time now to create an account. When you create an account, it asks you for information about what categories you're interested in, and education is one of those categories. So I would highly recommend that you create a Twitter account and start exploring and seeing if you can use some of the resources on Twitter to help you during this time. on the Google site that we have created for you, we've included a page that has some people that I recommend that you consider following on Twitter. Just today, the people that I've put on the website have posted resources that you could use right now with your students. So they are constantly sharing free resources, encouraging. It's a great way to build your professional learning network and bounce questions or problems off of other educators who may have run into similar issues and have solutions for those problems. So I definitely recommend that you explore that as a platform.
For the sake of time, I'm just going to move us through a couple of slides to get to some resources. As I mentioned at the outset, Edutopia's 5-step guide to making instructional videos, regardless of platform, is super helpful. I happen to be lucky enough to be married to Donna McAndrews, who's a library media specialist in an area district. And she's done a tremendous amount of work in the last few days for her colleagues. And she's allowed me to share recommended resources for teachers that she's put together. And there are links to a number of instruments and tools online, instruments and tools for instruction that she's embedded into this document. The slide development template for lesson design and lesson planning that Edutopia has made available. I found this really simple to use and a nice structure to work within that helps us focus on the most important aspects of learning that we intend for our students. And then CAST's resources for UDL planning for online instruction. They have a lot of great links on this site that are useful resources by grade level as well as discipline. And then University at Albany's Remote Education Resource Center also does the same thing by grade level and discipline, a ton of material and its content material that is online and accessible. Those are some wonderful resources. These are helpful article resources that I just think help us take perspective during this period of time. That Let Yourself Off the Hook article is beautifully written, but it has so many powerful ideas that it's important for all of us to keep right in the front of our thinking and work. Larry Ferlazzo's 7 Tips for Remote Teaching is a short, wonderful little video from a fellow practitioner, and he's asking us to keep some things in mind, and it always is good to have those things repeated. The Adjusted Syllabus is a quick read. This comes from a UNC Chapel Hill College professor. It's all on one page, and it's perfect just to reset our thinking about what matters most right now. Those other articles are filled with some resources that teachers across the country are using and questions that they're raising. That last article, Grading Students During the Coronavirus Crisis, What's the Right Call? Districts are trying to figure that out, and I think people are starting to get some clearer instructions from the administrators in their districts on that. And then in next steps, we're thinking about how we can dive into some of the things that we talked about today that may be big questions for you that you would like some additional follow-up on, things we didn't talk about today that you wished we had. Please go ahead and comment in the chat with the time we have left.
Thank you all so much too for taking the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule right now. We really appreciate you connecting with us here today. It's been awesome.
Hi, Gene. If you're looking to connect with colleagues who are teaching ELs online, we actually had a webinar on Tuesday that covered some strategies for online teaching for ELs, and there's a number of great resources there. The chat from that was also very, very good. I'd be happy to send that to you at the conclusion of this webinar.
That's awesome.
It's great to just watch the chat scroll through and to see so many familiar names and see so many names.
Yeah.
I'm just wishing everybody well in the days and weeks as we go forward, and
Yes.
that you find opportunities to strike a balance between the enormous burden each of you is shouldering and how to take care of yourselves.
Absolutely.
It's so important right now.
And support one another.
Yes.
So everybody, the slides will be sent out along with the Google site and the recording tomorrow. The chat will be attached to the email, so you guys can check out. So that way you can check out. Sorry, just reading the chat there. So you can check out these resources. I will. Yeah, you'll get your credit in the recording. So thank you all for participating and for your time and for your wonderful ideas that you shared with your colleagues. Next week, we'll be doing a webinar on leveraging assistive tech to support students with IEPs. That will be on April 9th at 4. Some of you are special ed folks, and maybe some others, general ed teachers as well, might want to consider checking that out. And until next time, thank you for all you're doing to support students and families in your district. Thanks again. So have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.